Hi everybody, it's Deb Constien and I am doing my day one debrief for you guys. I actually went to a session today that I wanted to share the most about with you guys. It was all on the FDA. So the first part of the session was called, and I'm looking over here because I have my computer with my photos up so I can see what the screenshots were that I had taken. So just giving you FYI. So the first part of the session was called Study of Pediatric Rheumatic Diseases, the FDA Perspective, which is really interesting. And the person that was presenting was from the Division of Rheumatology and Transplant Medicine, and she is from the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research through the U.S. Food and Drugs Administration, which is the FDA as we know it in the United States at least. That was session one. And it was really interesting because they talked about the different laws that have come across, and the very first one was called Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act, so the BPCA, and that was passed into Congress in 2002. And that provides financial incentives to pharmaceutical companies to voluntarily conduct pediatric studies by the way of the written request. It's a WR, they called it. And let's see, the second law that they talked about is the Pediatric Drug Development Law. It was called the Pediatric Research Equity Act, the PREA. That was passed into Congress on December 3rd of 2003. And what is interesting is that they were calling it PREA. So PREA is mandatory. And the other one that I had just talked about is voluntary. So they're looking at the different drugs that we have, which are the different drugs and the biologics. So the PREA is required studies, and the BPCA is voluntary to do the different studies. So I found that interesting that these are things that I had not known before. So it was definitely a learning process for me as well. And the PREA, they said studies may only be required for approved indications. And the BPCA, which is the voluntary, is studies related to the entire indication for why the medication is prescribed for pediatric kiddos. So that was interesting. And the overall summary of that part of the session, so not to get too complicated for you guys, but it talked about solid pharmacologic evidence supports the clinical development program, and it is adequate and well-controlled trials. They take advantage of available programs that are out there, and the point is that they want to engage the FDA early in discussion of clinical development program. So that is also, I think, a very important piece, is that it's early in the clinical development versus catching on a little bit later in the process. So that was one part of the session. And this one was the one that stood out to me the most. It's called the FDA Update on Biosimilar and Interchangeable Products. And this person was also from the Office of the Therapeutic, Biologic, and Biosimilars scientific review staff and on staff at the FDA. So they talked about the general requirements, and to actually do studies on a biosimilar is they have to put in an application, and it's called a 351K application, and it must be included in the information demonstrating that the biological product is a biosimilar to a reference product. So the reference product is the first name brand like Humira, and then this is to state that this is a biosimilar of Humira, for example. And it utilizes the same mechanism of action for the protocol, for the proposed conditions, and that the conditions for use is proposed in the labeling and have been previously approved for the reference product, so the first name brand product. And it has the same route of administration, the dose form, and the strength. So it is a copy of it, but not the exact same cells. So that's why it is called a biosimilar. So in the interchangeable biosimilars, an interchangeable biosimilar is a product that can be substituted for the reference product at pharmacies. So at your doctor's office or at the hospital, or if you go get an infusion, that type of thing, without the intervention of the prescribing healthcare provider. And it is subject to state pharmacy laws. Each state has different parameters and methods and timing of notifying the patient and things like that. Quite interesting that they were talking about all this stuff. They were talking about, again, the biosimilars and the interchangeable biosimilars. They went into a study, so that's what I'm going to go peek at, is the key takeaways about switching. And they actually did a lot of testing, and studies were conducted to see if a patient was put on the reference medication and then switched to the biosimilar and even switched to a different biosimilar. They're saying that there were actually key takeaways. I'm looking for that now. They said that the FDA approved biosimilars are as safe and effective as their reference product, and you can expect biosimilars to have the same benefits and risks as the reference product. The FDA's approval of the interchangeable biosimilar does not indicate a higher standard than the biosimilar, and the biosimilar and interchangeable labeling is not required to be the same as the reference product. So they don't have to look the same as far as labeling goes. So it says that, but it is expected to incorporate relevant data and information from the reference. So the original, like the Humira, like I was describing to you. The summary of that was that biosimilar manufacturer must also demonstrate that the product has no clinically meaningful differences from the reference product, and in terms of safety, purity, and the potency. And the interchangeable designation does not indicate a higher standard of biosimilarity. And I found that really interesting. It's just reinforcing all the studies that they've done to make it effectively equivalent to each other. They're not copies because they're not the same cells, but they're similar cells. I just wanted to share those key points with you. That was the one session that really jumped out at me today, and I wanted to share that with you all. First and foremost, we were at a lot of meetings. We had some pharma meetings, and think everything has just been fabulous. So thanks so much for tuning in, and until tomorrow.